I'm really amazed by your sound and your ability to project your sound because I've been fortunate to have played with you a couple of weeks ago, and I also want to get into the gig and how that felt. But
Yeah.
just the topic of sound and projection of sound, what are your thoughts right now on this, and how did you work on that?
Yeah, I mean, sound is the most important thing to me. I think most people would agree that the sound is your identity. It's who you are, and when somebody hears you for the first time, no matter what you play, the sound is the thing that compels them.
Mm.
I yeah, playing alto saxophone all my life. Like I never was a multi-instrumentalist really. I never played tenor. I played soprano, but those things were always a necessity as a saxophonist. I never wanted to play soprano, although I do have enjoyed it, but alto has always been my voice. So, but the reason I say that is that alto saxophone is, I think, one of the most unruly of the saxophones. I mean, people are always talking about soprano, right?
Yeah,
But I think alto has
yeah,
risks sounding amateurish and can sound without a good tone. It can sound very nasally. And
yeah,
so for me, my early idols were people who had amazing sounds. Like my first big love was Cannonball Adderley,
yeah.
and an alto saxophone doesn't get better. That doesn't sound better than that. That is
Mm.
the ideal. So, although I sound nothing like Cannonball, my sound is not like that. But I think that what it does is that that kind of role model um, expresses, the priority in what musicians should be focusing on. So, for me, I spent a lot of time working on sound, and I there was one teacher that I had who was really influential to me, and I had studied with some great teachers when I was young. Jerry Bergonzi and Joe Viola and George Garzone, and some really outstanding musicians. But at one point, I was studying with John Purcell,
Mm.
who's a lesser known saxophonist, but he was this was in New York. He replaced Julius Hemphill in the World Saxophone Quartet, and he had worked with a pretty diverse thing. Like I think, played with Stevie Wonder at one point, did different things, but his thing was just sound, and he became kind of a guru for Dave Sanborn. Like Dave relied on John for almost everything, in terms of sound. Whenever Dave had a recording, whatever, John was there working on his horn. And John's thing was like, resonance, and the instrument is a cymbal, and everything has to be lined up and ringing. And so we spent a lot of time working on um, you know, the basics of embouchure and air, tongue placement. But then beyond that, the things about like the saxophone, like technical things about what screws, John would get off in this deep end, like, this screw, if you change the screw here and you replace it with another one, that's going to change the sound of the saxophone. And it does.
Mm.
It changes the pitch. It can lock certain notes in. Even some people you might have heard of, like the neck strap changing the sound of the saxophone.
Mm-hmm.
Well, that
Yeah.
was a thing. That was a thing that John came up with. That was his thing. So if you ever hear anybody talking about the next track, that was John's thing, and it's true. It makes a difference in the sound. So it was like you do a deep dive and go into like all aspects of the sound. And when I was studying with him, I mean, I really only practiced sound for like 4 hours a day, and that was it. Just all these different ways of working on sound, and that was
But
it.
did you combine them with something musical or something like a tune or?
No, no. It was about attacking the note, getting the attack so that every attack on every note on the instrument was like a bell, so that there's a point to the sound and every
Yeah.
note, and not using your tongue, so that every time you attacked a note just with air attacks, the note came out like an arrow, and it had a point to it. And then obviously then we work on dynamics and all of this stuff and evenness of tone, and
Mm.
there's tons of things to do, and embouchure placement and open the jaw. And so, I mean, yeah, it wasn't related to playing music at all. It was just about
Mm-hmm.
the mechanics of producing sound in the way that makes the horn resonate the most, and overtones and things like that. So, but yeah, and so after doing that for a couple of years, it was like I finally understood, what sound how to produce a sound, what a good sound was, and hopefully carry that into everything else. But yeah, he was an important influence for sure. And John was actually a teacher for a lot of cats, back in the day. And he's a bit controversial, he taught Joel Fromm, he taught a ton of guys.
Mm. What are you working on right now in terms of sound and projection?
Honestly, I don't work on sound at all. I mean, I work on, I guess the thing that I work on the most is, I mean, if the sound is not right, then I'll address it,
Yeah,
but I work on hearing things, hearing my sound in my head. And so that when I practice whatever it is, that connection to the instrument, my physical and mental connection, so that so the instrument is an extension of my body and my mind, so
yeah,
I'm hearing everything, and it's not about the thing for me is like not necessarily, when I was young, you think about, your practice as ways of programming yourself. We're kind of like computer programmers where you're inputting things, right? But I've learned over the years that for me, it's about not programming, taking the outside and putting it in, but it's about bringing it out and pulling things out of yourself, and that's what I work on. So yeah,
yeah. But to notice these things within yourself, you have to also work on uh, that the other view of noticing
yeah. Well, that's
noticing
right.
things.
That's right. That self-observation and understanding yourself and the sounds, the way that you hear music, and the patterns that you hear, which have been kind of ingrained in you, that limit you from hearing other things,
Yeah,
so that you can open yourself more. And that's really so much of it is self-reflection and sitting, with yourself and understanding that. And I found like slowing things down. I work, when I practice, I work very slowly. And
yeah,
sometimes, I won't play a note for, 15 minutes. So I'll just sit there, and in my mind, I'll be working on whatever it is and opening myself up. And, technique for me, is really about, letting go and trying to get to that perfect point where my physicality is kind of gone,
mm,
and that's the ideal, and it comes and goes, I mean, I know it'll be something I'll be working on till I'm dead, but
mm.
that is something that we as improvisers experience, and so that it's a real thing, even though it's very hard to quantify and talk about, but that your mental state and how you hear and how you approach the instrument and whatever tension you hold in your body is affecting everything. So, yeah,
So meditation is a part of your practice.
absolutely. Yeah.
Yeah,
I spend a lot of time doing that. Like the first thing I usually do is I don't really play a warm up per se, although
yeah,
I guess it'll have a mental warm up in a way, which really is just about like, breathing, meditating deeply, and then starting like playing something in my mind and imagining, the way that we talk about hearing music in your mind, right? Well, you can also feel music, right? Your
mm.
physicality of it, like, how your hands, because, hearing is just one of our senses. So we can also imagine the feeling of playing these things. But
Yeah,
I've,
nice.
but, but I've found that so often there are roadblocks that we built in. For me, this is my experience, that are mental roadblocks that, why is it harder to do this than that on your instrument, right? And very often those things are artificially created in your mind. Like there's no reason for them to be any harder. You've just learned them to
Yeah,
be
it's a
harder.
not a technical thing. It's a
Yeah.
yeah,
Yeah.
it's an
It's a
inner
weird.
thing. Yeah,
Yeah. 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 And sometimes, when you're really attuned, to the music and in the moment, and the instrument melts away, those blocks are gone, right? So it's
yeah.
about being able to access that way of approaching music and your instrument, the physicality of it,
Hmm.
because that's always something. That's going to be there.
But that
So
also has to do with ear training.
Yeah,
right? I
exactly, which is
mean,
like talking about hearing it in your mind, which is
yeah,
everything, because when I find that if I'm hearing something very clearly in my mind and I'm playing it in my mind perfectly clearly, if I go to play it, it's absolutely effortless because in my mind it was effortless, right?
yeah.
So, yeah, yeah, it's that's the kind of thing that I work on, you know. Um, and because ultimately that's where the music is, you know.
Mm. Yeah, then because usually what we hear in our minds is less pattern oriented, or
Yeah.
formulaic, or it's more free, and it's more honest than what we have under our fingers. I mean, has been a constant practice for me as well, like to get rid of what I have under my fingers,
Yeah, that's
and
exactly
to
right.
just to dive into what I can play when I whistle. Yeah, like that's what
Yeah.
I that's
Yeah.
that's really me, actually. I'm
Yeah,
uh,
that's
not that I'm
exactly
a
right.
whistler, but that where do these notes come from, and where do
Yeah.
those notes come from?
Yeah. That's very true. And it's funny because once you kind of approach, making music in that way, all this stuff that you thought you needed to practice, you don't need to practice. It's
Yeah,
it's yeah. It's very interesting, and it's a hard concept to talk about and describe, especially to students, because I think that what we're talking about is something that, is obviously more of an advanced, kind of approach to music where you've done the homework and you understand tonal harmony and, atonal concepts and so now you're trying to delve deeper into it and understand on a level which you can then kind of let go, because
yeah,
ultimately that's the point, because the minute you start really thinking when you're playing is when you kind of kill the music.
yeah, it's true. Although I have to say that sometimes to get myself out of my head, I have a I imagine something, or I kind of build a little rule for myself in terms of
Yeah,
limitation or something, and that goes together with the thought process. But it's usually
yeah,
a way for me to get out of my head again, to
yeah,
get myself out of my comfort zone.
yeah, 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 it's basically a springboard. I do
Yes.
the same thing. Like, I'll think, if either, when I start something, I can have an idea like, concept of starting with this or that, or sometimes if I'm in the middle of playing, actually, improvising, making music, there'll be a point sometimes where you have this gut feeling where like I'm kind of trapped in this one-dimensional bubble within the solo, and I need to reach outside of that for contrast, to get a
Yeah.
different color, right? And so then, you might have okay, let's do this, and then boom, you're out of it, and then you follow. So it kind of leads you. It's a path, that helps you create more diversity within your improvisation, and your
Hmm.
mind interjecting that, you know, yeah. Yeah, I
Mm.
mean, the psychology of what we do is really interesting, and I think that so much of that is not discussed with young musicians because so often it's about pedagogy, like, do this and do that.
How would we teach that?
Yeah, that's a good question because I think that is an experiential thing. It's like in ways, it's kind of like talking about music physics. Oh, we have dark matter. Oh, we have evidence that it exists, but we can't find it. Where is it? Or that kind of thing. And I think that we can talk around it, and describe what we're saying. But I think that every musician, they have to kind of they have to experience those things and then zone in on it, find their own ways. Because I know for myself over doing this for many, many years, I've gotten better at being able to, calm the mind, get into that state of, where you go to play music. It's kind of a sacred place so that,
Hmm.
you can allow these things to happen. It's not easy because, it's that whole Zen thing, what Yoda in Star Wars, do not try, do,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
It's that
There's no
thing.
try.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
I was going to ask, like, is there some form of literature that you have read? I mean, talking about Zen, there's that archery book, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
And Zen Mind, Beginner's Mind. Are these
Hmm.
books that are important to you, or is there anything else that you've checked out that helped you in that regard?
Yeah, I mean, I've read all those books. I was very into philosophy when I was younger, and I went through, Zen and Art of Motorcycle Maintenance, and
Yeah, yeah,
Zen and the Art of Archery, and I
yeah.
also would read Krishnamurti. I read, several of his books, and
Who's that? Who's that? Christian?
Krishnamurti. If you're not
Ah.
familiar with him, he's really fantastic, like philosopher. He was an Indian man who I think Mary Baker Eddy, who was the founder of the Theosophical Society, and we're talking 1920s, I think,
Mm.
brought him to the United States, and he would lecture and write books on philosophy, and like a blend of Eastern philosophy but for Westerners, and
Mm-hmm.
very, very interesting. I remember coming across in my Coltrane research, coming across the thing where apparently, who was it? I think it was, I don't remember. Oh, Bill Evans recommended the Krishnamurti book to maybe Train or somebody like that.
What's
So,
the name of
but
that book?
I don't remember. It's in my library upstairs, but yeah, I don't remember.
Maybe you can
Krishnamurti.
send it to me, and then we'll put it in the episode here.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. There's some really cool videos too of him, from like the 1950s, where he talks about, his philosophy. And I was reading the Don Juan books. I don't know if you know the Carlo Castaneda. It might have been a U.S. centric thing, but Carlos Castaneda was an author who wrote these books of the Tales of Don Juan, which were basically there are more novels, but they're supposed to be maybe real. And he went to Mexico and met with this shaman who revealed all these, philosophic ideas and things. And
Greetings. My name is Sam Amadon, and you are experiencing the Pablo Held Investigates podcast. And I am experiencing the Pablo Held Investigates podcast as I do every week. It's such a beautiful thing to be able to go so deep with Pablo and the musicians he talks to. I go back and forth between the conversation, and I'll pause and go to listen to the musical examples, and then I'll return to the conversation. It's profoundly beautiful and enriching. And if you connect with this podcast as much as I do, I highly recommend that you support Pablo on Patreon, because it keeps the podcast going and it provides a whole backdrop to a whole other dimension of the investigation. There's two tiers. There's a general listening podcast supporting tier, which has background materials and other stuff around reflections on Pablo's listening. And then there is a more of a practicing instrument lesson type tier, which is even deeper and more specific. I hope you support it and check it out, because these are the kinds of things that keep the world turning at this time in our universe. See you out there in the investigation zone with Pablo.
I read a bit from your Coltrane research on your website, and it's fascinating. And what I really like about how you write is, like, it makes me want to get back to the music and listen again,
yeah,
with a new gained understanding, or, partial understanding, that because some of it is also, I have to say, is above my way of perceiving the music. I sometimes can't follow fully. So there's
yeah,
a
that's
there's a there's
yeah,
a very detailed question that I have,
yeah,
which goes back to the trichord understanding of the trichord thing, which maybe you should explain again. Where, like, when we talk about the basic motif of iris,
hmm,
I think of it as a a major second and a sixth.
right,
Like a major sixth.
right, exactly,
But you write 0, 1, 3, right?
yeah, yeah.
So
So
my understanding, I don't get why this is 0, 1, 3, because this would, in my mind, would give me just a minor third. or something
right,
within a minor third.
right. Well, it's that's the problem, with the writing about this stuff using non-tonal terminology. These are things borrowed from pitch class set theory, and the problem is that it can be kind of inaccessible, and so that's the price you pay to write in academic terms, unfortunately. But so basically, within 12 tone theory, and you know, 20th century kind of atonal harmony, one of the big revolutions was the fact that we can identify every pitch class set or group of pitches, and that is either dyads, triads, tetrachords, pentachords, hexachords, etc. Um, as belonging to certain family based on their interval content. So for trichordal set classes or trichordal families, um, the way that it's similar if I use a major triad as an example. So C major, when I say C major, or if I just use the term major triad,
Yeah,
by saying major triad, you understand exactly what I'm talking about. And
exactly.
it's a generic term that if I say major triad, that applies to 12 different transpositions, right? So that's a global term. Um, in the same way, 013 is a global term that describes a certain interval content, a triadic interval content, and that interval content would be in its root position, and I'm going to use root position as a tonal term, would be like C, D flat, E flat. Okay. So
Right.
that would be the root position of that trichord. Now, if I rotate that trichord, and in tonal harmony, we don't use the term rotation, we use the term inversion. So the first inversion C major triad, right, would be E, G, C, right? So now, to use that term inversion, which is not correct in post-tonal music, but to say, okay, let's invert, a C, D flat, E flat. Well, that first inversion would be D flat, E flat, C, and that's
Right.
that's what
That's
you're talking
Iris.
about,
Yeah.
right? That's Irish. So when I say 013, what I'm doing is it's like me using the term major. So
Mm.
013 is the name for that family of pitches. So the same way we wouldn't necessarily discern between a major triad in first inversion or second inversion if unless we're analyzing something in terms of voice leading or whatever. So that's why it's called 013. And
Okay. Yeah.
the 013 comes from the fact that in order to identify pitch class sets, we use a chromatic scale starting on C, which we then use an integer 0. Okay, so C is always going to be 0, and which that results with B being 11. So you have 0 through 11. Now, by doing that, we can identify, C sharp D is 012, C sharp E flat 013, and so
Yeah.
forth, right? And then it gets into the sticky point. I mean, there's so many rules that it's hard to speak plainly about it because there's always these caveats. But um, essentially, as long as you're aware of inversional relationships between sets, and at what level you're talking about them, you have integer notation which helps to identify them. If a set is an inversion of another set, it might have a different name, like 023 and 013 are belong to the same family because it's whole step, half step, whole step, right?
Right.
But
But
so
what's the difference?
well, the
Let me
different
think.
well, there's here's the thing. It's it can be convoluted, but the idea of what they call inversional equivalence. Okay, within set theory, within 12-tone approaches, inversional equivalence is a bit controversial. Some theorists don't think that sets harmonically reflect and are equivalent in terms of a harmonic aspect. There are some, people like Alan Fort, which the way he identifies set classes, which is a big name, and then the members of those are different. It gets very confusing, and you get into the weeds. But the fact of the matter is that for me, inversional equivalence is valid because, and the thing that theorists very often will argue is their example of why it's not true is because they'll say, well, major triads and minor triads are inversions of each other, but they don't sound the same. But I would argue that they sound more the same than other trichordal sets, and that if you
Mm.
position a major and minor triad within a progression of harmonies in a certain way, in a certain inversion, you can disguise and absolutely make them the ear will pick them up as being closer to each other, you know.
Mm.
Um, the way that we're used to using major and minor is tonicizing them and using them in a way which establishes some kind of either order of hierarchy, right? But if you're using them within an atonal setting, it can mask like any kind of tonicizing, quality. So anyway, so that's 013. Sorry to get off on this tangent,
No,
but yeah,
please. I'm
yeah,
all about tangents, so that's beautiful.
yeah,
Please, if you want to continue, please continue. It's just I find
yeah,
it super fascinating.
yeah. Well, I mean, the thing with Coltrane is that, the basic, premise of the thesis is that Iris is the Rosetta Stone for
Mm.
showing that Coltrane is thinking about using pitch class sets. I mean, there are people who've, identified, the Love Supreme motive, right? From Love Supreme and that being, 034 or 035 rather.
Yeah.
And those ideas. But the thing is that within his late period, Coltrane, in a lot of his interviews, talks about he's changing his focus from harmony to melody. And what does he mean by that? Well, my argument is that this is what he means by that is that it's the structural qualities of what he's playing. It's not he's dealing with trichordal sets a lot of the times, but not exclusively. He'll deal with tetrachords as well, and he'll deal with hexachords as well.
Mm-hmm.
For example, with the tune "Sweet Meditation and Prayer and Meditation," which is from the record Transition.
Mm.
That suite has 5 movements, and the first, third, and fifth movement are this motive, this piece that is written around hexachord, which essentially it's a synthetic hexachord that's not found within diminished or any of these other symmetrical structures, but essentially it would be like an F minor seventh chord, but with a
Do you want to
sharp
play it?
11. Yeah, I could play it.
Yeah.
But this is really interesting to me because, the idea that he's not just thinking in terms of things in one static way, but he's thinking in terms of how they relate to each other. Like one of the improvisations that he does on Saturn, or yeah, on Saturn on Interstellar Space. There's a moment where he's playing trichordally, but then he ends up playing a whole tone scale as a result of two trichords at a tritone, distant tritone. But then
Mm.
he manipulates that and creates the Messiaen scale. So
Mm.
the Messiaen scale with the added two pitches, right?
Yeah.
Anyway, so this is the scale that Train plays on meditation, prayer and meditation suite. So it's essentially this, right?
Mm.
So when you hear him play, so what he does on the melody is actually the pitches of that hexachord with an approach note to each pitch. So it's like he'll approach either like the major subset, which would be A flat major, or F minor. So
Mm-hmm.
or like
Mm.
right. So that's kind of what the melody is structured on. But then when he plays the solo, it's like this sound.
Yeah.
Now
Yeah,
that
but that's
happens.
vigil, right?
Yes, and that is the thing. It's the same hexachord as Vigil.
Yeah.
It's the same thing, and they were recorded at the same time.
Mm-hmm.
So people think vigil is like this modal thing. Well, it is, and it's not. It's based on that hexachord. And the thing is, I had this conversation with John Arabagon. You know, we nerd out on train sometimes, and
Yeah.
John was saying that he could hear. We were talking about this hexachord that I found, and he was saying, "Oh man, that's in Ascension, right?" And so I went into Ascension. I didn't transcribe it or anything, but you can hear him messing around with that sound, you know, even
Mm.
there then. So you know, he's thinking pitch class sets, whether it's 6 notes, 4 notes, 3 notes,
Yeah.
and especially in his late period where you hear him, you know, the tune Jupiter and Jupiter
Mm-hmm.
Variation are all based on what would be set 023, right? So it's
Oh, two,
basically,
three. Yeah.
which
Mm-hmm.
would be like you know, basically like C, D, E flat. But
Yeah.
the way he does it, he juxtaposes them in perfect fourth. So
Oh yeah. Right.
that's the sound, right? And then when you hear him improvise, he uses that set, you know, not exclusively, because the thing with Train in his late period is that, you know, he would use pitch class sets, trichordal ones, you know, for a while, and then he would change to a new pitch class set, and then sometimes he would do a different type of thing based on hexachord, and then there's sometimes gray areas where there's a mixture of stuff that's not clear, you know, and then it comes out of it like in a new set, in a new trichord set. So there'll be, you know, these transition points. It's very interesting, man. You know,
Mm.
but you know, the whole premise is that this was an important area of interest for him. You know,
Oh yeah.
you
And
know. So
what I just listened to. Yeah, I listened to number one yesterday, which is also related to Iris.
yeah, absolutely. Well,
And
here's the really interesting thing that with that. The thing that we didn't mention was that with Iris, you know, Alice is playing the same set as Train is, which
yes,
is the thing. But
yeah,
the funny thing with number one, you hear Coltrane at a certain point in his solo go into this motive. But the thing is, it's not the Iris motive. If you sit down and transcribe it, what it is, it's the Love Supreme motive. Um, so he'll go like this. So instead of doing, I'm trying to, let me see, yeah. So he'd go right, which is major second, perfect fifth,
yeah,
instead of
fifth, yeah.
all right, which would be the Irish motive, right?
Mm.
But the funny thing is, Alice hears him do that, bo-da-da, 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 and Alice goes right into comping for him using 013.
That's what I mean. Yeah,
Yeah,
it's
yeah,
there.
yeah, it's totally there. Yeah,
And the cool thing that like, I thought about Train in terms of like throughout all of his um, progression, he tried to find ways to become more free. But the way that I think his predisposition was methodically and always rooted in something. So he
yeah,
had to find ways to bypass that way of thinking for him to be free. But also,
yeah,
what is in your research, in your work, is like it's never random. It's never just anything, but it's
yeah,
his way to expand and to get out of his things.
yeah,
Uh, and a really small technical thing that he does, which is sometimes disguising these things that where he's just playing around with sets like that, where he's overblowing or doing things to his sound where it's for maybe then where it's hard to sometimes really hear the pitch because he's doing
yeah,
something to the pitch, so it doesn't sound like uh, 013, it sounds like 01 what,
yeah, yeah.
you know.
No, that's exactly right. And you know, and that's a really interesting thing is that, you know, as I was working on all that music, you know, and transcribing it all, you know, I mean, there's even the areas where you think that this can't necessarily be structural, right? because of the sonic kind of timbral variation that he's using and stuff. But ultimately, there is a relationship between what he's doing and what he did or where he's going. Like how it's nothing is like there's nothing is thrown away. You know,
Hmm.
it's all meaningful. You know,
Yeah,
um, yeah, it's amazing. Yeah, it never ceases to inspire. You know.
yeah, yeah. What's the last thing of Coltrane that you listened to?
What was the last thing I listened to? Recently, I probably it was one of it might have been the Johnny Hartman record
Yeah,
because I put that on for dinner, so that might
yeah.
have been it.
It's a dinner album for me too.
Oh my
Uh,
God, yeah, it's so beautiful, man. You know,
yeah,
yeah,
yeah. And
yeah,
although the mood is so relaxed and everything, and it's a ballad album, he's there's something about his sound that opens up, especially on this record.
yeah.
And I'm really into Autumn Serenade these days, and
Oh,
want to
that's
learn the
beautiful.
song, and
Yeah,
that the way that he picked this song for this album also,
yeah,
and what kind of room it offers for him to blow is
yeah.
beautiful.
It is, and it's just funny, you know, because when you hear Train play, these standards, the minute you hear his sound and the way he expresses himself on these things, there's a certain kind of urgency, but yet a certain kind of, you know, uh, always beautiful, but it never feels like it's referencing anything but himself. You know,
Mm,
it's not like trying to be any of his influences. You know, it doesn't sound like, oh, Dexter or whoever. You know, no, it's just he has such a concept that on ballads especially it's just he's so lyrical and yet so he has such an individual sound, yeah, it's I mean that's the thing for me, that I'm always inspired by, because Train, there's all this technical stuff you can talk about, and certain recordings and whatever, but when it comes down to just pure lyricism and sound and being expressive, there's no one who does it in a more personal and deeper way. You know,
mm,
it doesn't get it, there's not it doesn't get deeper than that. You know.
mm. Can you describe the stages of writing your research
Yeah. So
about him?
it took yeah it took a long time. I mean, I originally started off with a couple of analysis that I did for myself, and this is back probably in 2012, maybe 2011. And I would speak about these things when I do workshops at universities. And so initially it was more about there was a piece called Saturn from Interstellar Space that I did. And then Iris. Iris was one of the first ones that I did because as I'm listening to it, I'm like, I'd been working on writing music and improvising using pitch class sets for a while, long time. And I had already finished writing or I was in the middle of writing my book maybe. And I'd listen to Train. I'm like, I know exactly what he's playing. I know exactly what this is. I can hear it, and I can hear that Alice is playing the same sets because I was writing music that way, right? So I'm
Hmm.
like, that's what she's playing. So then I transcribed it, and I was like, no one knows this, and so I would go and talk about it at workshops. And then in 2015, I was in England doing a workshop at the Royal Birmingham Conservatoire and basically presented this material. And one of the directors of the program there was said, the arts and design and media dean, he knew my music, he knew me, and he said they're trying to bring people doing interesting, PhDs, and would you be interested, because this is exactly the kind of thing they're looking for. So I was thinking, well, I think this was worthy of this kind of work because nobody's done it. And
Mm.
so I talked to my wife. She was unemployed at that point because she had been let go from her job at Rogers and Hammerstein. So she had worked there for like 25 years and they downsized. So anyway, I was like, do you want to move to England and I'll do this PhD fellowship? And she was like, yeah, let's do it. So we moved to England and did
Let
it
me
there, you know.
intersect for just a moment. Like, I don't know the technical sides to writing a PhD. what it entails for you. I mean, you're writing, you're doing this research. In what way are you paid for it, or in what way can you also use it afterwards? You know?
Yeah. Well, um the studentship that I received basically paid me a stipend that I was given every month. And we had an apartment in New York that we rented out while we were gone, so I was able to focus full time on the PhD,
Wow.
um, but which was great. And I did that for about 2 years, and then about 2 years into it, they one of the staff members left, and then they offered me a full time position. So I started working there full time halfway through the PhD. And so that went on part time at that point. And then shortly after COVID hit. And so then teaching got messed up. And then I'm still working on the PhD. You know, long story short, I ended up finishing it in the spring of 2021, you
Hmm.
know. And at that point, I realized that I didn't want to stay, in academia, that it was too restrictive on my time. And I had to get back to what I was doing before I did that. So then we moved to Portugal,
Hmm.
and I've been here for almost 4 years now.
Hmm.
So yeah, but in terms of like what I can do with a PhD, I mean, I didn't. I had someone ask me recently, well, did you do it because you wanted to be an academic or get teaching? No, I just did it for the work, and I thought maybe at some point I might adapt it into a book.
Yeah.
But and that's still in the back of my mind, but there's so much material. And to
Yeah.
create a book that would, I mean, so much of the analysis hinges on the clarity of the illustrations. So to have a book with that many illustrations is not practical. You can't do that. So it would really, and then to scale down what the book covers, it would be a real challenge to kind of do. And honestly, I was burnt out by the time I finished doing it.
Yeah.
So this is why I like went back to, my playing career, and, did the new record as a way to kind of find my way out of that and,
So
get back.
Ancestral is the work that you did after the PhD.
Yeah, that was my idea at the end of the PhD was that I wanted to kind of purge myself, and purge is the wrong word, but, to kind of do a musical expression of what that is. And so for me,
Right.
the first idea was that I want to do two drummers, because that is, Coltrane at the end was really interested in so many of the recordings. Two drummers, I mean, Meditation with Rashid and Elvin, but there's some live recordings where there was more people, and
Percussionists.
then right, and then the other thing is I didn't want it to come off as a Coltrane tribute where I'm playing, with a bass and piano player who are trying to do the rhythm section thing. I was like, no, Ben Monder. Ben is going to do everything that I need him to do. And so that was the idea for this recording, to be kind of a way of reaching out and making something artistic. And that's not to say the music is not, I don't think, Coltrane-esque at all. I mean, maybe in some remote way it is, but I wasn't trying to write Coltrane tunes or
Yeah.
that kind of thing.
Hmm.
From So it was, but that
That's
was
what
the
I
impetus.
love about it. Also,
Yeah,
like you
yeah,
do all this work, but you come out you.
yeah,
That's so beautiful. Before
yeah.
we get into the new record, I really want to get back to the your process of writing that research and writing that PhD. Please
Okay,
tell me more, because I interrupted you to ask about the technicalities of a PhD, but I want
all
to get
right.
back to what the actual work was.
Right. Well, the first thing was, there's generally the major portion of it was that, I had to do transcriptions of all that music. So, and that was incredibly time consuming. And so I spent enormous amounts of time transcribing all of Coltrane's solos on those two records. And then, there were some things that I left out, like I don't do a complete transcription of Venus, because that's been discussed in academia a bit. And
Mm,
so, and I agree with the analysis that people have done on that. So I was like, that's just going to be duplicating things. What I do is I mention certain things that are relevant to the whole process that come from Venus. And then within Stellar Regions, the track Stellar Regions are actually Coltrane's first attempt at Venus, which are with Alice and Jimmy Garrison. So I talk about those and the structure of those and how they intersect with the Venus that we know from interstellar space. But anyway, the transcription part was, enormous time sink. I Part of that process was I was in touch with Andrew White, the famous saxophonist from DC,
Yeah,
because I got talked to Andrew a few times and got transcriptions from him, so that I had something to compare my transcriptions with, because there
that's so
really wasn't.
useful
Yeah,
if you have
exactly.
somebody who you can talk to, because
Right.
I really feel it's like a lone. I love transcription and I do it all the time, but it's such a a lonesome pursuit.
Yeah, yeah, it is. And having those transcriptions to be able to look at my transcriptions and compare, I mean, I had a certain way of representing the rhythms that I wanted to have, that I did, which I were for clarity's sake, so that you could see how things were grouped and how the phrases were built. Andrew had his own way of writing out rhythms, and also I found that more or less, we jibed on almost most things. There was a couple transcriptions of Andrew's where he had transcribed things at a certain point of like maybe 30 or 40 measures, which were actually a half step off or a whole step off from where I was transcribing them. So then I would go back to the recordings and I would listen to them and compare and make sure that I'd done I transcribed it right, and that,
Oh yeah,
and,
right.
and right, right. I mean,
Because
that
when you
was
have if you have one pitch wrong, then all the intervals.
everything hinges on
Mm,
correct, yeah, because if one pitch is wrong, it changes everything,
mm,
absolutely. So
mm.
so that was useful because it made me reflect on what I did, and it kept me honest with, like, okay, what is this? Is this really right? And so, but we're talking, a good year and a half of transcribing, and then after that, the analysis. I had amazing supervisors who were really helpful. They weren't jazz musicians, but they were very, very, very well informed. Deborah Moore was my principal theory advisor, who was really helpful in, you know, having me be, cognizant of other ways of analyzing things. So look at different voice leading models, to see like deeper structures within what Coltrane was doing. So then the analysis came, right?
But
And then,
sorry,
yeah,
I want to stay with transcription for a while, because I'm interested in like how do you maneuver transcribing in a free setting? Like,
yeah.
what's your view on writing down rhythms?
Yeah, well, I mean, for me, the writing down the rhythms, it was important to keep things proportional, right? So in terms of this is how much longer than this note, right? How
Yeah.
much faster is this? And so that the proportions are correct, right?
Hmm.
There might be a certain areas where Coltrane would emphasize, like the head to Leo, like we
Mm.
played, right?
Yeah.
Actually, the Leo actually emphasizes five, ba 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 ba, right? That phrase is in five. One, ba 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 ba. Ba 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 ba
Yeah.
ba 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 ba,
Yeah.
and that, so I would group things in a way that hopefully clarified meaningful kind of rhythmic patterns or groupings, and also if there were unified sets that expressed a unified harmonic idea, then I would group them together, because it was easily show the set pattern. Whereas sometimes, like with Andrew's transcriptions, because he wasn't looking at it in that way, he would break things up sometimes, and it would obscure the set homogeny, where there was really homogeneous set use. So I tried to clarify that so that you could really see when he was prioritizing certain sets,
Mm.
while keeping the rhythms, correct, and the speed and proportionality right, but yeah, I mean, there was a lot of considerations, and within the PhD there's a whole chapter on, analytical, like transcription philosophies and
Oh, then I
analysis
haven't gone as far yet.
yeah.
um, but how do you what's your tool set for transcription?
Well, I
What are
was
you
using this
using?
I was using the dumbest name ever. It's called the Amazing Slow Downer.
Yeah.
And And it was really useful. But the problem is that when you're transcribing something, especially something as where it can get so complicated and so fast, that when you slow something down, there can be artifacts in the sound can happen, they can occur, and so then you have to go back and forth between the original speed and the slow speed and verify whether you're hearing an artifact or whether it's actually something in the music,
Yeah.
and that's very time consuming, right?
Yeah.
And so I mean, I would do that, especially on some of the sheets of sound, kind of really fast things. I'd be like, okay, there's a thing that Coltrane does on Offering, and he also does it on every track of Interstellar Space, which is this hexachord, which is you call it the major hexachord, but it would be like C D F C D E F A F G A, right?
Whoa,
But
whoa,
he'll
whoa.
play this.
Slow down. I need the amazing slow
I'm,
downer
I'm
for
sorry.
this.
So
C,
the major
D, E.
E F G A, right?
Oh, yeah. Okay. So
So
that's
so two
all.
two
That's,
trichords, which are
yeah.
O2/4, but they're juxtaposed at a perfect fourth, right? So Train does this thing where it's a
I want to
sheets of
understand,
sound.
sorry for interrupting again. I want to
No, no, no.
understand this again. So zero, what did you say?
Well, you could call it 024, and then you would call it 579. That would be
Yeah,
the
but
name
then
in dictionary.
and then you said the two different things, and I want to understand
Right.
this.
So if that's a hexachord, those are 6 notes, and if you break that down to the first 3 pitches, C, D, E, right?
Yeah.
Called an O2/4 trichord, and
Right.
then the next 3 notes, F, G, A, is also
Oh, it's the same
O2/4
thing. Yeah,
trichord.
of course.
They're
Yeah.
the same structure, but they're a perfect fourth apart, right?
Mm-hmm.
So Train has this thing that he did, and this is part of the thesis, where on Offering and then also on every track of Interstellar Space, he plays this descending line, which is based on that hexachord.
Yeah.
And it's interesting because he'll fragment it and then he'll go into the pentatonic subset. So, for instance, the tune Selflessness, which is, ba da 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 da, dee da 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 dee da, that's the hexachord. And ba da 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 da,
Yeah.
right? And then he'll break it down and dee da 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 da. He breaks it down into a pentatonic subset that's within it. That tune is what Train is playing, but at hyper speed. It's like, Star Trek,
Yeah.
engines
Warp.
engines gonna blow, warp speed. And Train is
Yeah.
like, and he runs 2 octaves.
Yeah.
Well, that structure, then he modulates between them. Sometimes he leaves certain pitches out within it, but then he'll go back to it. And it kind of is really interesting because it's the only 2 recordings that he ever does that thing on. Like you can
Mm.
listen to the sheets of sound from the late 1950s, like 58, Setting the Pace and all those. And
Yeah.
this thing never appears on any of those recordings.
Mm-hmm.
So so that tells me that this is something that he must have been thinking about,
Mm-hmm.
because why wouldn't it appear anywhere else? And
Mm-hmm.
also the correlation to the tune Selflessness, because it's literally selflessness at like sped up 1,000 times.
Yeah.
So yeah. But anyway,
Wow.
so we got into I forget where we came from, but that's where
We
that's
were
where we
talking about transcription and
Oh,
your
right.
tools of
Oh, right.
transcription.
Exactly. So those lines are really hard to transcribe.
Yeah.
Sometimes he speeds them up and he slows them down. And so when you're transcribing those, really important that you're constantly toggling back and forth between the actual speed or just a tiny bit slower than the actual speed, and then like half speed or whatever, so that you can, because it's easy to imagine there are certain things, especially drums, the overtone from the drum hitting or whatever.
Oh, yeah.
There are artifacts that pop in that you have to be aware of.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah. I I never did anything like what you did. So and also I never transcribed a full song. I mean a full performance of more people. So I can't really compare this to what I'm doing to what you are doing. But I'm hesitant to work with tools like the slow downer, and I've
Yeah.
only a handful of times used something like this because I actually want to be able to, and I'm pure the same. I want to be able to take in something and try to understand it in real time,
Yeah.
you know.
Yeah. Yeah.
And so
I
I kind
totally
of
agree.
and it's sometimes it's a bit a mean rule that I put on on myself. You know, it's like you're supposed to hear it in the moment. Don't slow it
Yeah.
down. And if it's and what I did, which is like maybe took a little bit more time, but I just slowed down the choice of material that I transcribed. So you know
Right.
what I mean? I
Yeah.
transcribed a lot of ballads and a lot of lines on ballads and a lot of
Yeah.
stuff like that. And then once my ear got faster, I slowed. I mean, I sped up that way by choosing something that is faster.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, in my personal life, dealing with, with my art, I mean, I can't say that I use the Amazing Slow Downer really, but within this academic realm, so much stuff has to be quantified and it's very important,
Yeah.
when you're writing scholarly articles and stuff. One of the things too, at one point, like there was some pitch variations, Coltrane was playing a little sharp on the head to Leo. So then I had to quantify that, and say, oh, this is at, this frequency, whereas it should be at this
Yeah.
frequency and
Right.
blah, blah, blah. I mean, that's what academia is and writing,
Mm-hmm.
scholarly writing. So it's something I hadn't really done before I did this project,
Yeah.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
after the transcription process, the analysis starts, or maybe
Right.
even while you're doing this, it already
Yeah.
realizations come to you.
Sometimes, yeah, because as you're transcribing, pop out, and I might make a note, or I'll circle things in a way, and then I'll go back, and then I'll write about it. The text part was really the challenge in
Oh yeah.
writing. The visual analysis is one thing, but the text analysis, it was really challenged to get a kind of narrative which was a simple explanation of complex musical principles, and I mean, I think I did a pretty good job of describing complicated things in a
Yeah.
technical way that you could follow,
Mm-hmm.
but that was definitely a challenge because if you look at the main body of the PhD, there's only a few illustrations, and there are obviously, there's a second, there's an appendix with all the visual analysis, but all of that stuff is described in text, and so doing that wasn't always easy, yeah. But yeah, so that was the next step, and then obviously then I had to deal with, I the whole beginning of the thing is about what's been done, like who's done scholarly work on Train, what what are the kinds of analysis that's been done, and then my use of the analysis that I've chosen, the criticism of analysis in musicology, all of these types of things, the background of like, the techniques that I'm using, why I'm not using this and why I'm using this, and then the analysis comes,
Mm.
so yeah. So it was, it was very, very fulfilling, but I'm glad I'm done with it because it was a lot of work, you know.
Mm.
Yeah.
Yeah, but when you think back now to it, what do you think? What are the key things that make your musical life more rich or help you more these days? When you think back to it, what is it?
Yeah. I mean, I think for me, um, the thing that mattered the most is looking at like getting an understanding of how these things were realized in Coltrane's music. And the thing that I take away is, I've always been very methodical person, and when I work on things, it's very, it's A B C D E F G. I go through and I try and all the permutations and whatever I'm doing. And in that way, it can be kind of restrictive, when you're working on certain concepts. And I found that with Coltrane, while he was dealing with some very, unique and strong concepts, there was always room for the music to breathe, and there was always
Mm.
room for other things to come in, and there was always, there wasn't anything that was restricting. Like if something had to happen, it happened. He let it happen. It wasn't like, oh, I'm going to only follow these rules and that's it. And then, for me, the way that he blended ideas, the way he would move from one thing to the other, the way that, and especially on, the Saturn, the way that he starts to mix and match different sets. And it's not just about set continuity, like doing one set type of set. It's like he's moving through different sets now, but the idea is that we're still dealing with trichords, but he's not trying to create, homogeneous areas. It's more about the heterogeneity of the whole thing. Like I'll move through this, land on this, this will become important, that doesn't, and then, so it's
Mm.
much more fluid and less dogmatic. And so for me, that really helped me loosen up in my ideas about, working on these things and let things kind of like give them more free reign.
Mm. When I listened to the new album Ancestral, by the way, thanks for sharing it with me
Oh, sure.
before the release. I really love it, and I think you've created a beautiful space for all of these great individuals to come together and play with each other, and the choice of two drums and how they interact with each other, and also that you know they really like each other. I've read about Billy idolizing also Andrew and his
Yeah,
work, and I haven't read about it the other way, but I'm sure there's a mutual love for each other, and
absolutely. Yeah,
the way that you and Ben engage with this energy that comes from the two of them, and but what I really find super cool is what you already hinted on, which is like, because I was listening to this album and it sounded wonderful to me, and I was drawn in. And then I read about the album on, I don't know what it was, either Bandcamp, or I read an early review or something.
uh-huh.
And it says, maybe it's in the press text also, that this came out of your PhD work, and it's kind of, as you said, it's a you kind of channel a few things. But the thing is, I didn't hear that when I listened to it,
Right.
but in a beautiful, not in a negative way. There's nothing missing, but it was like, I don't hear the Coltrane research, and now we're documenting, the
Yeah.
negative aspect of that,
Right.
what that could be. I don't hear a thesis. I don't hear. I, ju- I hear that element of breath that you talked about throughout
Yeah.
the whole record, and also sometimes when we listen to the bad examples of, okay, here's a 12 tone row, and I really make you hear that it's a 12 tone row, and it's like, and
Yeah.
now we're dealing with this material, and it becomes this thesis, and it stops being music.
Yeah. Yeah.
I didn't hear anything of that. So you really excelled at transcending that material, and that those thoughts and those analytic pursuits, and you came out with just an incredible record.
Oh, thanks, man. Well, yeah, I think that so often, especially when you talk about theory, right? And especially talking about any kind of 12 tone or set theory ideas, people get so caught up in the notes and the theory that the music gets left behind. And
Yeah.
and I think that it's like any tool, it's only useful as long as it creates beautiful music and music that's compelling. And so the theory shouldn't matter. And for me, the premise of this recording was to give everyone space to be who they were and to bring in music which I knew would do that. I mean, I've written, complicated music in the past, and I mean, there are certain rewards that come from, poring over rhythmic minutia and I mean, it's a sound that you can't get any other way, which
Yeah.
can be super compelling. But I wanted this to be, that's part of the idea behind this recording was that the Coltrane ethos of like, musicians being able to improvise who they are. And these guys are the greatest musicians that have ever lived. So it's like, why would you want to put a straitjacket on them?
Hmm.
So, yeah, it's interesting. I mean, I feel like, all the theory stuff, at the end of the day, it's not about like, you know, jumping through hoops, you know? I mean, if music is about jumping through hoops, then I don't want any part of that, you know?
Yeah.
It's and so, you know, I tried to set up scenarios. Now the compositions have post-tonal things in them, things that, you know, like reflect my interest in set structures, but you know, those are meant to create a certain environment or vibe, you know? It's not something that's meant to put a straitjacket on anyone, you know? And Ben has
Hmm.
his own vocabulary, and why
Yeah.
would anyone want to dictate anything to him? Because he is master of harmony, you know? So you know, let the people do what they do, and you're always going to get the best result that way, you know?
So
But
on Awakening, um, there's this moment in the head in where Ben goes into a more bigger chordal thing.
yeah,
So
I
that's
didn't give him
him.
that. That's him.
Yeah. So
Yeah,
you
yeah.
just gave him the melody, basically.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, on a few of the pieces, the only piece that actually has written harmonies for Ben, which it's basically looks like a piano score essentially, is the ballad Quixotica, and
Hmm.
that's you know got Ben playing this harmonic ostinato that then I
Yeah.
play the melody over. But on all of the other pieces, Ben is free to interject whatever harmonies he wants, you know.
Yeah.
And I knew that, you know, whatever he did would be way more, you know, suitable to the moment than trying to come up with some preconceived thing, you know.
What
So,
there's this swinging piece where it's
yeah.
kind of diet melody or triad melody.
Um, it's
Where
yeah,
you
that
play in harmony with each other.
Yeah, I think you're talking about Under the Wire, and that
Yes.
piece is based on it's got a bass ostinato which repeats 3 times, but then the melody has a phrasing which contradicts that. So it for me it was interesting to combine those two things in a way because I don't think when you listen to the theme, the melody played over the bass line, you're quite as aware of the repetitive ostinato because the way
Hmm.
it fits melody. And then at
Yeah.
the very end of the melody, then the last melody comes back in and plays, you know, a little, well, one measure with the bass line. And then there's a contrasting section, which is just all half notes and over, you know, as a kind of way to cool out from that. And then we go back into it and blow over it. But that piece is, you know, utilizing post-tonal things, but it when it was composed, it was rhythmic and harmonic scheme that I've been working on, and but it was one of these things that as I'm writing it, you know, and I was writing something that had a swing feel because I wanted something with that on the record,
Hmm.
and it kind of struck me as having almost like a monk kind of flavor in a way,
Yeah.
you know, that kind of like angularity and that kind of like bounciness, you know,
Yeah.
which I thought, well, cool, you know, that's all in there, you know.
Hmm.
I had one reviewer ask me about it and say that, you know, they're hearing like some New Orleans thing, and I'm like, well, yeah, probably. I mean, it's all, you know, it's all in there at some point.
Hmm.
So,
But it doesn't have any harmony when when you improvise on it. I mean,
well, it
because you
does.
said
It does. But
the only piece is the ballad, but it
yeah,
seems like
there
there is
there
something.
is harmony. Yeah. And Ben, it's a quasi blues.
Yeah.
It's kind of a blues form.
Yeah.
It's not literally a blues, it's scaled down, and the
Hmm.
harmonies are more sparse, and there's no 2 fives, but it's
Yeah.
essentially that kind of sound. Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
What was your impression of um, Andrew Cyril and Billy Hart when you presented them the music and how they dealt with learning it and making it their own?
Yeah, well, I was blown away. I mean, I sent them the music, you know, fair amount of time beforehand, and,
Demos?
it was just sheet music. I don't think I sent them any MIDI files.
Okay.
But, one of the funny things was that there was more music than what we recorded. There were a couple additional things that were a little more complicated that I wasn't sure how they would work, but I wanted to give them a try. And that there was one piece that was, um, this contrapuntal piece, which I thought maybe they could just blow through. didn't work the way that I thought it would. But I wanted to see if maybe it was possible. And
Hmm.
to be honest, we had no rehearsals. We just went in the studio, So it was like this was all done the day in the studio. So, I wanted things to be accessible, and I didn't want people to be fretting over the music, like, oh shit, we got to try and play this, because then that kills everything. So, um, but it was funny because Andrew came up to me at the beginning, and there was one piece that I wrote, which was just this motive that we actually never really played in the way that I intended it, because I ended up kind of trashing it and using it just as a motive in one of my solos on the
Mm.
it was the one the duo or the trio thing with me and Andrew and Billy, where Ben's not playing,
Yeah.
just the sax solo one. And I was going to use this theme in a different context, and it was like, you know what, no, I'm just going to use this just as a little signal out, and that's it. But they could respond or not to it. But Andrew came to me at the beginning and was looking at the music. He's like, and the way I had written it out on the paper, because it was one of these mobile kind of melodies that I could drop in and out, and then fragment and play portions of, and then play the whole thing. And it wasn't meant to be a static theme. And so I'd written it in a way where no bar lines, but Andrew thought it was like, a complicated, like long bar of 27 or something, right? And he had really checked it out. And
Wow.
I was like, he was like, I was looking at this thing, working on it, and he came to me with all these ideas about it. I was like, I felt so bad because the amount of time that he spent with it, and it wasn't meant to be like this thing. It was more just me dropping this melody over this groove. And so they took it totally seriously. And
Wow.
and the fun thing too was you mentioned, Billy's respect for Andrew, and vice versa, and that was so apparent in the studio. I mean, it was really wonderful to see. And some of the moments between when we were taking breaks, there was one particular moment where Billy's at his drum set and Andrew walks over, and Billy starts talking to him. I just caught it after it started, but apparently about a drummer who had this thing who I wasn't familiar with. It wasn't like Roy Brooks or somebody. It was somebody who I'd never heard of. But he was saying, "There's this lick, man. It's kind of like Joe Jones," and they were talking about Philly Joe Jones and this other guy. And so Billy's playing this thing, and Andrew's like, his eyes lit up, and he's like, "Wait a minute." I got to get a piece of paper. I got to write this down. So
Oh,
he runs over and gets a piece of paper and pen. He's like, "Okay, go ahead, man." And so Billy's like playing this thing, and Andrew's writing it down, and Andrew's like, okay, and just their energy, and Andrew's like, okay, but move that to the hi-hat, right? Do that on the hi-hat. And so Billy was doing this, and he was like, yeah, that's it. And then it's like Billy would come back with this other thing. It was so inspiring because they were like
wow.
two teenage kids. And yeah, it just shows you how the music is just timeless, and it just affects us no matter what age you are.
Hmm.
Yeah, it was really, really cool.
Wow. Thanks for
Yeah.
sharing that. That
Yeah,
sounds like an incredible moment, and that's
it was.
also. I mean, you want to do your record, but you kind of also want to have these experiences with these people.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. Yeah, it was really special. I mean, yeah, this recording session was a dream come true. I'd played with Billy in the past a couple times. I'd never played with Andrew before, but I'd met Andrew before. And so I was so excited and so happy when they both agreed to do it, because they never recorded together before. They've played together
Hmm.
before on a few occasions, some live gigs, but they've never recorded together. So, that was I was very excited when they agreed to do it.
Hmm.
Yeah.
Wow. Did you record in one room, or what was the setup like?
Yeah, we did. It was one huge room. They put a baffle between, myself and the drums were in one corner of the room, on each corner, and then I was on the other side of the room, and Ben was to my right. Um, and yeah, so that was I didn't want to break. We could have put the drums in booths and done that, but it just seemed to me like this needed to be more of a live
Yeah.
kind of session. We did have, yeah, there were some issues at first, but they got ironed out. So,
Mm.
but
Headphones or?
no, no, well, they were there, but I didn't really use them.
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah, I could hear them fine, you know.
Hmm. When you go to a recording session like this, do you know the music by heart already, or do you have sheets for yourself? Or
Yeah, I mean, with my music, I knew it. But Ben and I got together and ran through some of the music, just the heads and things, and I talked to him about it. So then when we got to the session the next day, we'd already kind of ironed out the melodic part of it. And then with Andrew and Billy, it was basically, just explaining the vibe on each piece, and letting them kind of find out their own space. I mean, I didn't, other than telling them, okay, this is the tempo and this is the vibe. I didn't really dictate what they were to do, and
Mhm.
they play brilliantly together and with the way they contrast. One of my
Oh yeah.
favorite thing, one of my favorite things is like the beginning of the tune Tug, where it's like, slow blues kind of, riff. And the way that Billy comes in with the time, but the Andrew is kind of pulling back at it, it's like,
Hmm.
and he's doing something totally different. It's just like
Yeah.
it creates a great tension, man.
Isn't that the
Yeah.
track where you don't play?
No, that's I play on that track. That's the one that's kind of like it's almost like a blues. Like Ben plays this repeated ostinato that's like boom, boo doo doo doo,
Oh yeah.
boom, boom, boom. It's just like a blues thing, but
Hmm.
slowish thing. It was meant that composition was meant to be kind of a post-tonal nod to like the old blues cats, because the melody, the composition of the what the guitar plays is the bass line, and what I play is the melodic line, form certain kind of harmonic structures which are at odds, let's say,
Hmm.
so yeah.
When you compose these songs, did you compose them at the piano or without instrument, or how did you
Um,
approach them?
yeah, I did. I mean, I composed them, most of them I composed away from the piano.
Hmm.
I knew what they would sound like, in my head, and then I would sit down and play them on the piano just to make sure I was hearing things correctly or whatever. Yeah, but
Hmm.
yeah,
Nice. Yeah, composing without the instrument is nice because it just opens up a different space.
yeah, it does. Absolutely. Yeah, it's funny because actually don't compose on the saxophone almost ever.
Yeah.
Yeah.
On the Live in Brooklyn trio album,
Uh-huh.
which is also fantastic, there's a Charlie Parker piece that is disguised.
Yeah.
Can you tell
Extra.
me what you did? Is it Visa, or which one is it?
It's relaxing at Camarillo.
Oh, of
And it's
course. Yeah.
and the title of the tune is an anagram for that, which is extra logical railman. So that's the title I came up with.
Nice.
Yeah.
Can you
Well,
explain what you did to the melody, maybe also with
yeah,
your saxophone?
yeah. Well, I couldn't. It'd be hard to show you, but it's very easy what I did. It was
Okay.
one of these things where I stripped the pitches of the melody away from the rhythm of the melody. So
Mm.
I took two different things. So the pitches came off, the rhythms came off. And what I did was I looked at the rhythms for a certain cadence that was similar within the tune that cadenced in the same way as the original. But what happens is, so I rotated all of the rhythms. I think it was about 50% rotation through the tunes. I'd have to look at it exactly, but
Mm.
essentially taking the tune and moving it. And so, that tune ends with boo ba da da, right? Is the end of it,
Yeah.
of the thing. And there's a point inside the rhythms of the tune where that happens also. So I shifted everything so that ended that way, and then I reattached the pitches. Then
Mm.
what I did is then because the tune is in C, right? So then I stuck in a bass line which actually outlines B flat. So then you've got this polytonal thing. So the melody is in C, but the bass line outlines B flat really strongly. It's just like kind of the most boring B da da. It's but it has such a strong harmonic pull that against the melody in C, it worked really effectively.
Yeah.
Then I reharmonized. Like I've done this. It's got that tune actually has chord changes that I've written for it, and I played it in a harmonic context. So the
Mm.
Live in Brooklyn record, there's no harmony, but then I attached harmony to it, and then that makes it sound even kind of more distinct from the original. But
Mm-hmm.
but the structure of it is that polytonal thing: bass line B flat, melody in C, pitches detached, rhythm, moved, and then it ends up sounding similar but different,
Yeah,
quite different.
totally.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, it's nice. It's practicing with the different parameters of the music to give you new
Yeah.
results, basically.
Exactly. Yeah. 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 And then that tune is actually a 13 bar blues with a 3/4 bar at the end. So then what we do is when we blow over it, we keep that 3/4 bar. So it's a
Yeah,
13 bar blues as you blow through it. Yeah.
yeah,
So, yeah.
nice.
Anyway. Yeah.
Now I want to go back and listen again uh, with that in mind, because I knew there was something going on,
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
also
Yeah.
not random, and also not just let me, it's I knew
Yeah,
there was something specific.
it's subversive. It's subversive because it plays with your idea of like what's familiar and what's not,
Yeah,
and I love making music that's compelling to listeners in that way, where there's this thing that's comprehensible, but then you can't put your finger on what's going on, but it
yeah,
feels there's a feel to it, right?
yeah.
Yeah.
I've had the pleasure of playing together with you in September, and we played the music of Alice Coltrane.
Yeah,
And
that was super fun.
yeah, man, I really, it's still resonating with me. I think back to that gig a lot, actually. And at first, I would like to know from you what your preparation process was like for this gig, and then we can talk about how the gig felt to you.
Yeah. Well, I went back. I hadn't listened to Alice's records in a while. So I went back and listened to those recordings that, the music that we were going to play was from. And that was a revelation. I hadn't done that in ages. And then, looking at the music and, making sure that I had a handle on that, being able to play it in a way which didn't feel like I was reading it. At least I was familiar with how, what was going to sound like. So that preparation, is pretty much what I did before we got together and played through it at the rehearsal. But
Hmm.
yeah, for me that music is it's part of the zone that I love to live in. That where you have space to realize your ideas in a way which is not really restricting, and playing
Mm.
with a group of musicians who are really open, who are responsive to what you play and supportive, and but then push in different ways to inspire you, So yeah, I love playing in contexts like that. So I had a lot of fun.
Hmm. When you think back to the gig, what comes first?
I think for me, you know, the amazing kind of band sound, because the way that the combination of musicians that you brought together, was something that I haven't gotten to play with before. And the
Hmm.
sound of the band was really cool. And I love the fact that, there was all this space. And I tried to just be aware of the space aspect of it so that you know, being the saxophonist, the sole kind of like loud guy. So I wanted to be really like in the ensemble,
Yeah.
almost like I was comping a lot of times and playing
Hmm.
within the ensemble and not being the guy that sits on top of everything
Yeah.
and is in the front row. And
Yeah.
and for me that's really fun. I like that. I like playing in ensembles where, you know, I can get a chance to play more of a pivotal part within it. But then when time comes, then I'll step forward, and then the spotlight might be on you for a little while, and then you step back and you make your contribution to the ensemble in the way that everyone else is doing in a supportive way. Yeah, and that for me is really fun.
Hmm.
Because so often, like I just did this tour in Spain, trio gig, and we had really nice audiences, and it was super fun. But, being like a saxophone trio, it's like, it is what it is, and
Yeah.
so, you're out front, and that's it. So these other, the other ensembles, are really fun to be part of. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah. I also felt like there was a nice looseness, apparent, where you can play, but you don't have to play because there's
Right.
enough people already who are playing. and
Yeah.
and for me, it was special because I was obsessing over her music for the past months so much, listening to it, transcribing pieces, and then setting up this concert where I could channel this admiration and really dedicate myself to her spirit and music was a special thing for me. And then to have people there who understand this music and have an understanding, but also like in some form have studied it or can find themselves within it and then make something personal with it was really special.
Yeah, absolutely, and I really felt that came across. I mean, I feel like the ensemble was, um, really cohesive, but expressed the individuality of everyone participating, and it
Mm.
wasn't like some, you know, uh, you know, repertory group. You know what I mean?
Yeah, yeah,
That
yeah,
wasn't what was happening.
yeah, yeah. It's true.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, I hope we get to do it again at some form.
Me, me too. That would be a blast. That would
Yeah.
be really fun, man. Absolutely. Yeah.
Yesterday, I listened to the big band album of Joe Henderson,
Oh yeah. Yeah, yeah. Uh,
and
that's
the
really
thing is,
fun.
on the on the web, I always read that you're on the record, but when I look at the booklet, I don't see your name. So I
Yeah,
was,
I know.
what's happening?
Yeah, well, that was one of the big disappointments in my life because, when I did that recording, I'm only on like a couple cuts, and that recording was done in 2 sessions. Like there was a session
Yeah.
from a year or 2 before, but when I went in, I was Bob Belden, who's one of the producers of the recording, brought me in for Steve Wilson, and so after the session was done, then, I find out like a week or 2 later, or actually it might have been a little longer than that. Bob's like, "Oh man, I'm so sorry, but they left you off. They didn't like on the session sheets, they didn't include me, right?" And Bob says, "But don't worry, it'll be fixed in future pressings. Like that's just the first pressing." Well, of course, they didn't I never checked, but I'm assuming they never included it, you know. But
Oh man,
you know,
what a
yeah,
drag.
but that a total drag because that was a high point of my life, man. But more
Mm-hmm.
importantly, though, more important than doing just the
Yeah, I
recording,
mean, you were part of it.
we did a week of gigs. So we played at the Blue
Nice.
Note for 5 nights and getting to hang out, with Joe and to play with that band more than just in the recording session was fantastic.
Wow. Tell
Yeah.
me everything about it.
Well, I mean, the music was a mishmash of arrangements by Mike Mossman did some, Bob Belden did some were Joe Henderson, some were Slide Hamptons. So, it was a combination of all those people's charts. Um, in the studio, it was kind of amazing being in the studio because the studio was just packed. Chick Corea was there with Al Foster, and Chris McBride is on the record, and Nicholas Payton, and like who's who of New York jazz was in the studio. But um, on the gig, it was George Mraz, Al Foster, Mini Rosnes who were in the rhythm section,
Mm.
and on the sax section was me and Steve Wilson. Steve was playing lead alto, I was playing second. Chris Potter, Tim Reese, and Charles Pillow were the sax section. And we've
I
basically.
talked to Chris about this,
Oh,
and
you
he
did?
said he was amazed. Yeah, yeah. Chris told me like that he was amazed how soft Joe Henderson's sound was. I mean, it's so big on the
Yeah,
records, and it's
yeah,
also uh, it has a volume to it when he plays, but
yeah.
it's very soft apparently.
Yeah, it is. And when you go to see Joe, I don't know if you ever had the pleasure of seeing him, but he always used a microphone, always. So, yeah, which, yeah, it was really special because I was sitting right next to Chris, and Chris was sitting right next to where Joe stood. So Joe was like arm's distance away. So when we weren't playing, I was just sitting there like just, soaking it up. It was an amazing experience because he's one of my big heroes. It'd be like Coltrane, Joe Henderson, and Wayne Shorter, you
Yeah.
know. And recently, Frank Basili, I don't know if you know him, a great Barry player in New York, plays with the Vanguard Orchestra and stuff. Frank
Hmm.
contacted me, sent me an email and said, "Hey man, you were in Joe Henderson's band, right?" And I said, "Yeah." And he says, "Hey, somebody gave me a bootleg of that band at the Blue Note." And I was like, "You want it?" And I was like, "Yeah." So he
Wow.
sent me one night. So I don't. It sounds like it came off the board, but so I have a complete night of the big band playing at the Blue Note, which was
Nice.
nice. Yeah,
Oh,
yeah,
great. I'd love to hear that.
yeah, yeah.
Wow.
It's super cool. But
Hmm.
um, but it was really special, I mean, just the music was incredible, incredible soloist, and just being around Joe's vibe, and he was really. I've found like with cats of his generation, like Andrew Hill and Joe, who I both, I knew Andrew a little bit, and I knew Joe a little bit from this. They have this certain kind of like, you know, I don't know what the word is, but there's like an elegance to them, like well spoken. Like Clifford Jordan was this way too,
Mm.
and they have this kind of like, well, young man, like this very kind of just this stylish, very articulate and very eloquent in how they speak, and um I don't know if it's a generational thing or what, but I there's a yeah, it's just I think about it, you'll see interviews with Joe, and you get an idea of kind of soft spoken, and yeah. So
Eloquent.
yeah, 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 absolutely. Yeah.
And what was he like
So
in the studio in terms of takes and did you see, I don't know,
it
how did
was
you react emotionally to what happened or what didn't happen or like
well, I mean, I was, pretty young. I don't know, I was 26 or something, 27, and to me, being in the studio with all my heroes, I was just trying not to I just didn't want to screw up, and Dick Oates was playing lead alto at that point, and I didn't want to, I mean, Dick I knew a little bit, but I didn't want to I step on it, I just wanted to like do a good job, and so I was like so concerned with that. And then Joe was off in a private room. There was one point where I think somebody had to go out and get Joe some reeds. I think he needed some reeds, so that happened. But yeah, yeah, yeah. So it was an incredible experience, and there was yeah. I think it was funny because after the session, Charles Pillow took a photo of the sax section with Joe, and then I kind of snagged it. Charles posted it on his website, and I snagged it from Charles's website
ah yeah,
because that's
you
that's
have
the only
proof.
photo. Yeah,
I
that's the
wasn't
only
sure.
photo I have.
Is is this you?
Uh, I can't see that. I see
I
one.
mean, it could also be Dick Oates. You're
Yeah,
this
is,
is
is that
Steve
Steve
Wilson.
Wilson? I can't. You know what? Yeah, it's probably Dick. Because if that's Steve, then it's definitely Dick. I can't
Oh
see
yeah,
the photo very
right.
well.
Because you were
Yeah,
subbing for
I
Steve
was playing.
Wilson.
I was playing second alto. Yeah,
Of
yeah.
course. Yeah. Okay.
It's
I
funny
see.
because I haven't played with Steve. Well, we I used to play with Steve occasionally with Maria Schneider's band.
Mm.
But back in the '90s. But I haven't seen him since then. Since the late. I haven't played with him since the late '90s. But uh, I'm going to be going to New York in a couple weeks to do this recording session with John Rabagon, which
Mm.
is John's project, but it's going to be Steve who's going to be playing soprano on it. So it'll be fun to see him again. I haven't seen
Oh,
him in
nice. He has a
so many
beautiful
years.
sound on the soprano.
He does. Yeah,
Yeah.
absolutely. He's one of my favorite alto players for sure,
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
So,
Totally. He's
but
great.
yeah, so that'll be fun.
So, and did you? How was Chick like in the studio?
Chick wasn't wasn't playing, I don't think, because I remember seeing him inside. The I think the cuts that I'm on, the pianist was Elio Alves, I think,
Okay, so
and
Recorda Me.
who was the Brazilian, the Joe's Brazilian group that he had. Um, yeah, I mean, this is like 1996, so my memory is not
Yeah.
super clear, but I remember being like in the control room, and Richard Seidel, the head of Verve, was there, and he had a copy of The Thing to Do, Blue Mitchell's record, right? And it
Mm.
has both Chick and Al on that record.
Mm-hmm.
And so he was like, man, look at this. And the Al's looking at the record, and Chick is like, and they're reminiscing about that record with Blue Mitchell. And
Yeah.
that's a strong memory that I had. But yeah, so.
That was Al's first record, I think.
Yeah, I think it was. Yeah,
Mm.
very true. But yeah, so anyway, you know, a lot of years ago, man. Doesn't feel like it, but it was.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I didn't know that you had a relationship with Andrew Hill. What was that like?
I knew Andrew through, well, interesting thing is that Andrew, he came back to New York like in the like maybe 98 or something like that, 97. And my good friend Ron Horton and
Mm.
also Frank Kimbrough,
Mm.
were friends with him, and Ron ended up becoming his musical director. And so we did a concert, and I think it was in 2000, which was at the New School, which was kind of a celebration of Andrew Hill, and Andrew was there, and it was a celebration of big band music, right? So we did all of these Andrew Hill pieces that were big band arrangements.
Mm.
And after the concert, Andrew came up and they gave him a bouquet of flowers and stuff. And so that's when I first actually met Andrew. Then, John Aber, who was a close friend, was playing with Andrew. And so I would go to see John and then talk to Andrew. And at that point in the early 90s or early 2000s, I was doing my own group with John. I had a quartet with him and Tony Malaby and Jeff Williams. And so I contacted Andrew just to talk to him, and just speak with him. And I'd go to clubs and I hung out with him a few times in clubs. And John, when John got married, Andrew came to his bachelor party, and it was
Mm.
hilarious to see Andrew at a bachelor party. But so Andrew was super cool, and he was always really complimentary to me and very an advocate, like Frank Kimbrough would tell me, Andrew loves you, and so I
Oh,
actually
wow.
had been pushing, like not pushing, but I'd been lobbying Andrew to play in his group because he had a sextet at that point. But Marty Ehrlich was playing in that group at that time, so Marty, stayed in the group. He didn't leave or anything, so there wasn't really an opportunity to get to play with Andrew. But yeah,
Yeah.
so, you know.
So, and when you called him on the phone, did you ask him about music
Uh,
or?
yeah, yeah. Just talked about, his recordings, music, just
Mm-hmm.
life. I sent him recordings of the quartet with John because, he was playing with John at that point. And
Mm-hmm.
yeah, I mean, he was another very soft-spoken but articulate and really supportive and interesting cat. I just, it's funny because you run into, you take those things for granted when you're young and when they're around, that the you have an opportunity to interact with, the great musicians in jazz, or at least get to go see them, and hear them live. And I realize, now that it was something that, I wish I had done even more of, because those are really special moments. And
Mm.
I think young people, need to take advantage of that. Whoever your heroes are, whoever you love,
Yeah.
go out, see them, and go and interact with them and do it because
Yeah.
those times are limited. Life is
Mm-hmm.
short.
Yeah.
It really is.
Is there something
Yeah.
that you remember from Andrew, talking to Andrew, that you think back to in terms of advice or
I can't.
memories?
No, I can't really think. Um, I can't think specifically. I mean, it's like 25 years ago. At
Man,
least something.
it's it's similar to what I'm doing here. It's like I'm talking to all my heroes and colleagues, and I go
Yeah.
in looking for specifics and information, and
Yeah.
and I end up with connection and
Yeah. Yeah.
a vibe. So sometimes
Yeah.
people ask me, so when you talk to that guy, what was most special about this? Like the question that I ask also,
Yeah.
and then
Yeah.
I'm like, well, I have maybe one anecdote or something that's
Yeah.
a handful of anecdotes with each episode.
Yeah.
And then people come to me and say, "Yeah, when you talk to this guy about that," and I'm like, "Yeah, that sounds interesting." So what stays is a feeling, not the
Yeah.
actual information I'm after.
Yeah, that's very true. And honestly, my wife is always complaining because I've never been one to hold on to memories, I guess.
Hmm.
I tend to live in the moment. My wife is always like, "Don't you remember this and that?"
Yeah,
I'm like, "Sorry, honey, I don't. I really
yeah.
don't." And that's been kind of the way I've been all my whole life,
Well, but that's why
Um,
you're good for each other. I said I don't know her, but like
yeah, yeah,
she
yeah.
covers that, and you cover other things.
Exactly. No, we each have our own talents. But yeah, that's always been like, "Don't you remember we did this in
Yeah,
1997?" And I'm like,
yeah.
"We did? I don't remember." But, yeah.
It happened.
I guess
Yeah,
yeah, yeah, I trust her. Yeah,
yeah.
yeah, it's funny.
We already touched on some of your teachers or people that you've learned from. Maybe we can get back to that topic for a little bit.
Sure.
Like, because with all of my teachers, I actually have a few things that I remember and that I have like go to memories that help
Yeah,
me in moments where of doubt, or when I have a question. I don't even have to talk to them because I've talked to them so much that I actually
yeah,
know more or less what their answer would be.
yeah.
So, what is that like for you with your people?
Yeah. I mean, it's funny, I'll think that if I think of um, different teachers, it'll be it's almost like you have this virtual conversation with them in your head, like,
Yeah.
"Oh, is this" and I remember years ago when I was studying with Joe Viola, I was at that point getting really, became aware that hearing music and practicing in your head was a viable and important thing to do, right? Um, and Joe I remember mentioning it to Joe Viola, and Joe was like, "Of course. We all do that." Just
Mhm.
like I discovered the wheel, right?
Yeah.
It's like
Yeah.
so yeah, it's always funny. Your mentors, the people who meant a lot to you. Jerry Bergonzi was a really important teacher for me, and I love Jerry. He's the best cat. Jerry
Mm.
was for me. Jerry was really pivotal because he came at a time when I needed him as a teacher, and he was able to basically present me. At that time, he hadn't written any of his books. There weren't any of his books hadn't been written. This was like 1984, 85.
Mm.
And Jerry's thing, he was still, I think, working out the pedagogical thing. And the thing that while we worked through some of his concepts, the thing that I got the most from him was that, what, you can take any musical idea you have and generate a concept around it, if you're thorough enough and if you're open-minded enough. And that was something that was maybe his greatest gift to me, you know. Um,
Hmm.
yeah. Because what that does is it gets you be your own man, and it lets you come up with your own ideas and value your own ideas and be able to systematically look at them as, is this musically valuable? Like, test your ideas and you'll find things that work and don't work. And then that's part of the process. And then through doing that, you'll be able to refine your ideas and their path. And that's how you define your sound, you know?
Mm.
So, yeah, Jerry was very important to me,
Yeah, and the thing that you do to a certain cell of material, the way that you treat it, that it becomes, if you do it thoroughly, it becomes um, part of your language also. Like what you do
Yeah,
improvisationally can come through the things that you study and the things that you always do to a There's certain
Yeah.
things that I always do when I see a new kind of shape, work with a shape, you know. There's certain things that I always do, and I think I also always do them when I'm improvising. You know,
Yeah.
these are ideas that I get because I'm accustomed to working with musical material like that.
Yeah, yeah. And and we gravitate towards sounds that we like. I
Yeah.
mean, there's reasons that I play certain things and reasons I don't play certain things. And
Hmm.
it has to do with my personal aesthetics, like what I like in music. I like harmony, I like melody,
Yeah.
and I like rhythm. And
Yeah.
so I'm not going to necessarily abandon all those things because they mean something to me.
Yeah.
And I'm moved by them still. I mean, one of the things that as I've grown older, is the value that I place on, you know, and this is a deep dive too, because once you use this word, you can't unuse it, is the idea of beauty,
Mm.
right? And something being beautiful. And as I've gotten older, I value beauty in music more than I did when I was young. I mean, in
Hmm.
in terms of like the idea of being moved by something, being brought to tears by how
Yeah.
something if I can achieve music that does that to someone, there's no higher compliment.
Yeah, but
So
it's very subjective
absolutely,
because
that's the
your sense of beauty is different than the
right,
next
right.
person's.
Right, but having had experienced that sense of beauty of what moves me is what
Yeah.
makes me want to produce that same thing
Yeah,
for
yeah.
people.
It becomes your ideal.
Yeah, yeah,
Thank you, John. That was fun.
yeah. It was fun, man. Thank you. I really am. It was a pleasure hanging with you and talking, and I hope we get more chances to do this, in real life, face to
Yeah,
face.
same, and more chances to make music together.
Absolutely, absolutely.